Tantor Audio presents Mink River by Brian Doyle. Narrated by David Drummond. The only music I can compose is that of little things. Giacomo Puccini. The past has not passed away, but is eternally preserved somewhere or other, and continues to be real and really influential. Everybody and everything is so closely interwoven that separation is only approximate. Pavel Florensky. Animals, as they pass through the landscape, leave their tracks behind. Stories are the tracks we leave. Salman Rushdie. Part 1. 1. A town, not big, not small, in the hills in Oregon, on the coast, bounded by 4 waters, 1 muscular river, 2 shy little creeks, 1 ocean. End of May. The first salmon berries are just ripe. Not an especially stunning town-wise. There are no ancient stone houses perched at impossible angles over eye-popping vistas, with little old ladies in black shawls selling goat cheese in the piazza, while you hear Puccini faintly in the background, sung by a stunning raven-haired teenage girl who doesn't yet know the power and poetry of her voice, not to mention her everything else. No houses crying out to be the cover of a magazine that no one actually reads anyway, and the magazine ends up in the bathroom, and then is cut to ribbons for a 4th-grade collage project that uses a jar of rubber cement that was in the drawer by the back stairs by the old shoebox, and the jar of rubber cement is so old that you wonder secretly if it fermented, or a mouse died in it, or what. No buildings on the national register of hysterical places, though there are some old houses, the oldest of which finally collapses on page 141. No cheating ahead to watch it slump like ice cream at noon, please. But there are some odd, sweet corners here, and friendly houses and sheds and barns, and a school and churches and shops, and certain rhythmic angles in the town, where a road and a building and a line of trees intersect, to make a sort of symmetrical, geometric, architectural, textual, physical music in the right light. The kind of juxtaposition of things that painters like to paint for inchoate, inarticulate, unconscious reasons they can't explain. And the light itself, well, there's a certain certainness of light here, the way it shafts itself through and around things confidently, exuberantly, densely, substantively. It has something to do with the nearby ocean, maybe, or the rain, which falls 8 months a year, or the sheer jungle energy of trees and plants here, where the flora release so many feminine ions that the light fractures into geometric patterns that are organized along magnetic lines coherent with the tides, and sometimes visible to the naked eye. Really and truly. And some buildings here have a moist, salty dignity, even as they grow beards of stringy pale moss, green as seasick old men, and long, relaxed streets that arrive eventually where they are headed, but don't get all fascist and linear and anal like highways do, and unusual fauna right in the town sometimes, like the young elk who ate a whole box of frozen hot dogs at a school picnic once, or the black bear who wandered through the recycling shed at the Department of Public Works and tore apart a pile of newspapers and was discovered reading the New York Times travel section, turning the pages daintily, with her claws as big and sharp as steak knives. Right now, for example, look up, right over there. See the eagle flying low and fast down Curlew Street? Watch. As he sails over the grocery store, he whirls and snatches a whirling piece of cardboard, and he flap-flop-flaps down the street triumphantly, big as a tent. You can almost hear him thinking, "I am one badass flying machine. This weird, flat, brown bird didn't get away from me, no, sir. Nothing can elude my lightning deftness in the air." Not something you see every day, an eagle chortling over a beer box, eh? And down the street goes the eagle, heading west, his capacious shadow sliding like a blanket over the elementary school, where a slim older woman with brown and silver hair and brown and green eyes is holding court over the unruly 6th grade, her eyes flashing. And over her grandson Daniel, age 12, with hair braided into 3 thick braids of different colors, red, black, brown, who is zooming on his bicycle just in front of a logging truck, giving the driver wiggy nightmares for a week. And over a sturdy young woman named Grace in an open meadow high on a hill, where she is slicing apart a small car with a blowtorch, her muscular right arm pumping and flexing with the torque of the torch, and the leap of her muscle making her tattoo flash like a neon sign, "Kiss Flash, my Flash, ass." And over a lithe woman called No Horses in her studio crammed with carving tools, as she is staring thoughtfully at a slab of oak twice as big as she is, which isn't very big at all. And over a man named Owen Cooney, who is humming in his shop crammed with automobile parts and assorted related ephemera, as his pet crow sits quietly on an old Oregon State University football helmet, watching. And over a grocer grocering, a priest priesting, a doctor doctoring, teachers teaching, 2 cooks cooking, a man beating his son, an insurer insuring, a woman vomiting in a creek, a banker banking, an old nun's heart faltering in her room on the top floor of the hotel, a man telling a lie in court, a teenage couple coupling on top of the blankets in the downstairs bedroom of her parents' house so as to be sure that no rumpled sheets will tell tales of their vigorous unclothedness, and so many more stories, all changing by the minute, all swirling and braiding and weaving and spinning and stitching themselves one to another, and to the stories of creatures in that place, both the quick, sharp-eyed ones and the rooted green ones, and the ones underground, and the ones too small to see, and to stories that used to be here, and still are here, in ways that you can sense sometimes, if you listen with your belly, and the first green shoots of stories that will be told in years to come. So many stories braided and woven and interstitched and leading one to another like spider strands, or synapses, or creeks, that you could listen patiently for 100 years and never hardly catch more than shards and shreds of the incalculable ocean of stories, just in this one town, not big, not small, bounded by 4 waters, in the hills by the coast, end of May, first salmon berries, just ripe. But you sure can try to catch a few. Yes? At the west end of the main street, where it begins to slide off precipitously toward the ocean, there's a long, low building faced all around with cedar shakes. Right over this sprawling structure, the eagle turns south toward his nest, and as he wheels against the noon light, his capacious shadow slides over 2 elderly men at a rickety alder table in front of the long, low building, and they look up right quick. "That thing big as a tent," says the taller of the 2. "Adult male," says the shorter man. "How can you tell from here?" "Can see his ego, the angle of his dangle." They grin. "Actually, I can tell it's a male," continues the shorter man, "because you notice that he's carrying a piece of cardboard, which is foolish. So there you go." "Gratuitous slur on our gender," says the taller man. "Men, the final frontier," answers his companion, "as your lovely bride says." The 2 men are drinking beer and eating salmon berries. Between them is 1 empty beer bottle. They split a beer every day at lunch. They work together in the long, low building behind them. They are, collectively, the Department of Public Works. They have public worked together for more than 40 years, in various jobs. They are the best of friends. They are in their late 60s, they think. They are not totally sure about their ages, because neither of them is in possession of a real, actual birth certificate, for reasons they were too young to learn at the time. The salmon berries are the first of the season, and the 2 men are eating them very slowly, tasting every bittersweet orange-yellow acidic drop, and then slowly sipping the beer, a tongueful, a thimbleful at a time. "Yum," says the taller of the 2 men. "Yup," says the other. Not everyone likes salmon berries. Vulgarians? I am told they are an acquired taste. Vulgarians? Salmon berries. Yeah, listen, this afternoon we have to get back to work on the oral history project. We promised that we would get back to work on it the day after the rain stopped, and the rain stopped last night, and we have got to get to work. We're behind something awful on the oral history project. One of our best ideas, absolutely. Whose idea was that? Yours? Was it? You were going on interminably one day about how one way to defeat time is by recording every story possible, not only from people, but from everything living. For everything that lives is holy, says Blake. Yeah, you said that. Also, you said that with the project, we could build an impregnable bulwark against entropy. I remember you saying that because you hardly ever hear the word entropy. Excellent word. Or impregnable, says the taller man, thoughtfully. Unable to be made pregnant? I have to confess, says the taller man, that I was under the impression that you invented the project as part of your vast and overweening ambition. Nope, your idea. It fits the expanded public works idea beautifully, though. What a resource, eh? Here's what I want to do this afternoon. I want to record osprey calls along the river. Those high screams, you know? Piercing sound. On a May day, as they're finishing their nests. I wonder if they're speaking in a different tone now than midsummer or early fall. These are the things to know. Let's add that to the list of things to know. Oh, thank God for computers. Remember when the things to know was on paper? My God, we had to buy that barn just to keep the reams of things to know. That was crazy. Listen, says the taller man. I've been thinking. Did it hurt? Listen, my friend, says the taller man, holding on to his line of talk like a rope. Did you ever consider that maybe the scope of public works as we have conceived it is too big altogether? I mean, other towns and cities use their departments just to fix roads and sewer lines and stream beds and such. We do those things. But we also are prey to what I might call a vast and overweening ambition. I mean, really. To preserve history, collect stories, repair marriages, prevent crime, augment economic status, promote chess, manage insect populations, run sports leagues. Isn't that a bit much? We even give haircuts. Are we doing insects? Did I know that? I'm teasing. But we try to do everything. Not everything. I think maybe too much. I think not enough, says the shorter man. Don't you ever think we could be wrong? Asks the tall man. Billy, says the shorter man, this is why people call you Worried Man. Cedar, my friend, says the taller man, not smiling. I worry we are arrogant. Cedar leans over the table and stares his friend in the eye. Billy, he says quietly. Billy, we heal things. That's what we do. That's why we're here. We've always agreed on that, right from the start. We do as well as we can. We fail a lot, but we keep after it. What else can we do? We have brains that still work, so we have to apply them to pain. Brains against pain, that's the motto. That's the work. That's what we do. Soon enough we will not have brains that work, so, therefore... We could stop interfering, says the tall man. Who are we to talk to that young woman, for example, Grace? Who else would say anything to her? Her family? What family? Her mother's gone, her brothers are donkeys, and the father isn't much in the way of a moral compass, let's put it that way. Look, Billy, what good are we to anyone if we are not ambitious to make a difference? If we don't use our brains, we're just two old men fixing potholes. Are potholes enough, my friend? I think not. "I watched that girl's face as we talked to her," says Worried Man. "She was humiliated. You know it, and I know it. Her face stays with me. Was that right? Did we have the right to sting her like that? Is that the purview of the Public Works Department, to embarrass the public? To speak to her honestly about her behavior is to care about her, Billy. In a way, it is to love her. Is it? Isn't it? Is it?" They drain the last thick, dense, bitter drops of their beer. "Owen says today is Joan of Arc's feast day," says Cedar, standing up to go. "Her name wasn't Joan," says Worried Man, also rising. "It was Jeanne la Pucelle of Domremy." "Brave child by any name," says Cedar. "She was a meddler, too, and look what happened to her, poor thing," says Worried Man. "She changed the face of history," says Cedar. "She was roasted to death one morning, and her ashes were thrown in the river, and the men who murdered her also managed to murder her real name throughout history," says Worried Man. They bow and part. Cedar to visit a client, as he says, and then to the river to record osprey calls, and Worried Man to his office in the department to record an answer to this question from his grandson Daniel. How did my mother get her name? 2. This is me, Worried Man, making a tape for my grandson Daniel about how his mother, who is my daughter, got her name. Well, no horses got her name because our people were the best horse stealers ever. By our people, I mean the people, capital P. We who have lived here in the coast hills longer than even our stories remember. We were terrific horse stealers. We were awesome. No one could steal horses like us, and stealing a horse is hard. I mean, the creature weighs half a ton, and they're skittery, and they're smart, some of them, and they know they're not supposed to hustle off quietly into the bushes in the middle of the night. They're supposed to stand drowsily in the milky dew until the morning when they get to eat again. Horses just want to eat. Anyway, you have to get to the scene silently, sometimes slipping past sentries and sentinels, and then you establish an immediate rapport with the horse, silently, of course, and then detach all ropes and hobbles and such, and then you calm the horse and lead him away, past the sentinels again, and the fact is that slipping past a sharp-eared sentinel with a confused, fat, half-ton animal is no easy matter, as you can imagine. Well, if you got caught, they'd slice your throat. I'm always hearing about counting coup in battle in the old days, where a guy at great risk to life and limb touches his enemy with a coup stick, escaping with great acclaim and all, but what's the point? I mean, you touched a guy with a stick. Big deal. I'd rather risk life and limb and come out of the fray with a horse. Now that's an accomplishment. You got something to show for your labors. Well, one time we were berrying in the valleys east of here, boiling berries into cakes, cooling the cakes in the creeks, and packing down horses with enough berry cakes to choke a small whale, an orca, maybe. Though they'd eat anything, coyotes of the ocean. Of course, to carry the cakes back here to Neawanaka, we needed horses, because this was before everyone and their aunt had a truck. We had a lot of horses. These were fine animals, absolutely, and they needed to be guarded carefully by stalwart sentinels with sharp ears and sharp eyes. I was chosen as sentinel, being then young and sinewy, and in the fullness of my itchy first strength. But I was also in the fullness of my first cocky stupidity, and I had boasted that I could pick more berries than any other man or woman, and also be a sharp-eared and sharp-eyed sentinel. And it turns out I was wrong. On the third night I was so tired and sore that I fell asleep, and that's when horse thieves from the valley made their move. they slipped up on me, and under my horse blanket they affixed 4 long, thin poles of red cedar, willowy, whippy things, and then ever so gently, ever so daintily, they lifted me on the blanket and propped up the poles so that they could gently urge the fat fool horse out from under me, which they did, and left me propped up in the air, sound asleep. Then they unhobbled our horses and silently made away with all of them. A dozen of the finest horses you ever saw. The next morning was difficult. We all walked home, of course, a very long walk, all my former friends jeering and cursing, and all of us carrying those damn berry cakes. And when we got to Neawanaka, everyone was hooting and jeering and telling the story of how I fell asleep. And I have to say that there was a lot of embroidering going on. I know a little about embroidering stories myself, as you know, but this was wholesale embroidering, all sorts of exaggeration, really not suitable at all to the occasion. My young, pregnant wife, Maplehead, was waiting for me in the little cedar cabin we'd been given by her parents, where we live still, as you know, and when I came in to see her, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up, and asked about all the hooting and hollering and jeering and embroidering, and I felt that I had better tell her the story myself, so she would get a fairly accurate version of a very unusual event. So I did. She laughed, snorted, chortled, wept with laughter, rolled on the floor, guffawed, howled, and etc. Absolutely. She laughed so hard, in short, my little thimbleberry, that she went into labor on the spot, and a few minutes later your mother was born, and that is how your mother received her name, which is, as you know, No Horses. And that is the end of that story. 3. Neawanaka has been a settlement of one size or another for perhaps 5,000 years. Human beings lived here for all the normal reasons you can name. It is well watered, with small but persistent creeks to the north and south, a small but serious river running right smack through town, and an ocean. There are trout in the creeks, salmon and steelhead run up the river in creeks seasonally, and perch and halibut and cod and such swim not too far offshore. There are so many fish of so many kinds in and around the town that for perhaps 5,000 years the name of the town was So Many Fish, in the native tongue spoken here. There are deer and elk in the spruce and cedar forests. It hardly ever snows in winter, and hardly ever bakes in summer. It does get an unbelievable amount of rain, nearly 200 inches one year, according to Cedar, who measures such things, and the rain starts in November and doesn't really end as a continuous moist narrative until July. But then those next 4 months are crisp and sunny and extraordinary times, when every living creature, from the pale cloudberry close to the ground to the eagles the size of tents floating overhead, is grinning and exuberant. And there is, of course, an amazing amount of wood growing here, spruce and alder mostly, although there's some big cedar and hemlock still in the more remote ravines, where loggers couldn't and still can't easily log. And there are more bushes and plants than you can shake a shrub at, most of them providing some sort of food or use, and there are grouse in the spruce thickets also, and a little quail with a topknot that makes really good eating, if only you can catch it. So, all in all, there is enough food to get by, and enough material to easily build shelter, and weather that doesn't set out grimly to kill you, as Cedar says of some other weathers he has known. So people have lived here probably from the first couple of days after the glaciers slid away, muttering, or from the first day that a little boat filled with exhausted people from elsewhere landed on the beach, or in the mouth of the Mink River. Howsoever the first people arrived in this little green cupped hand of a place, they stayed, and like all people everywhere, when eventually they encountered other groups of people, and the other people wanted to know what the people living in the cupped green hand called themselves, The cupped green hand people looked at each other's faces and cleared their throats uncertainly and met briefly to confer, and then emerged from their confab, harumphed, rattled their weapons, and said, "Why, we are, well, of course, what else would we be? The people." 4. This is me, a worried man, making another tape for Daniel about how I met my friend Cedar. Well, about 40 years ago, Maplehead and I were courting on the Mink River. We were way up in the hills near its source to the east. East in rivers of bliss. Blake. We were pretending to be fishing, but really we were learning how to make love. We were trying all sorts of ways of making love to see how we fit together as bodies and companions, without family and friends around us to shape us with their emotions and expectations, and seeing what ways of making love made us deeper with each other, and what ways were just acrobatics or showing off. We were trying to make love absolutely, with every muscle and every shred of our attention. Maybe, thinking about it now, we were trying to figure out how to make love in such a way as to make time not matter at all, or defeat it for a while. Which we did, for a while. I'll say no more. Hand in hand, wandering, terrified of each other's beauty. Blake. Well, we were there by the Mink, and we were actually fishing that afternoon, and we were sore and tired and happy, and to be honest, neither of us planned on fishing very long at all, and as I remember, your grandmother and I were already casting eyes at each other, more than we were casting for fish. But then I noticed a person's body going past me in the river, and everything changed absolutely from that moment. I waded in fast and grabbed that body. For a not very big body, it seemed awfully heavy, and I couldn't tell if it was an alive body or a dead body. But I was young and strong then, and not afraid of dead things, which are only cousins to living things, so I hauled with all my might, and got it up on the river bank through the ferns. Sword fern, I think. Maybe bracken. The body was naked and brown, and face down in the grass, and I flipped it over, and it turned out to be a man, who turned out to be Cedar, who turned out to be alive, although awfully waterlogged. We didn't know he was Cedar right at that moment, of course, and of course neither did he know he was Cedar right then, because he had been in the river a long time and was nearly completely drowned. I'd say he was about 90% drowned. He was awfully full of river, which is probably why Cedar is such a thing for rivers and rain. Heck, he lived inside the river for a while, which you can't say about many people, especially living ones. Anyway, when Maplehead saw me haul Cedar out of the river, she came sprinting through the fern like a deer. A lovely sight, absolutely. That woman could bound and float like a swallow, and still does when she walks, if you pay close attention. She knelt down and looked into Cedar's face, and he had just opened his eyes and seen me and realized that he wasn't drowned. And when he saw her face, he smiled, and she smiled, and he said, "I like your face better than his." And we all laughed, although then I decided to throw him back in the river. But I didn't, which was a good thing, because he turned out to be Cedar. We brought him home, and he recovered pretty quickly, but he never could remember how he got to be in the river, or where his clothes were, or anything at all from before we fished him out. All he could remember was that his name was Cedar. He knew that much. So that's how Cedar didn't drown. Lately I have been absorbed by bicycle repair, and so I must conclude this tape. I have repaired 17 bicycles in the past month, during which time I have become fascinated by spokes, which are really wires, and now I am utterly into wires. weight-bearing capacity, elegance, metaphor. They are so thin and taut and lie.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?